Thank you very much. You're more than capable of answering the questions that we ask them in hearings. So we'd love to have prepared and intelligent people before us, and of course people who actually answer our questions when we ask them. So thank you so much for that introduction, for your service. I'm really actually excited to be here, and I'm excited that CSBA is undertaking this whole issue of our military-industrial needs. Because I have now been on the Defense Committee, or the House Armed Services Committee, as we know it officially, for 17 years. This is my 17th year. So I have seen quite a bit of change going on over those 17 years. Let me begin by saying that I knew very little about the military when I came to this Congress, even though I've had several family members serve. But I will not tell you that I know quite a bit about the military because my husband is a retired colonel from the Army, and I have a 19-year-old son who is in the U.S. Army. So it's my job, as a mother in particular, to understand what our military is doing, what we expect of it, and whether we are equipping it well. And I think that's where we come to the industrial base. Of course, the industrial base is also an economic engine of our United States. And having been a businesswoman and a former investment banker before I came to the Congress, I'm always very interested, in particular, to understand what are those basic industries that we need to have regardless, that we can't trust in somebody else's hands, and how do we ensure that those industries and that ability is in our hands for use when we need to turn them up in particular. But how do we get by in the leaner years of the whole cycle? How do we double task them in a sense? Can they make commercial good use while we don't need them? And how do we have the ability to accordion or expand them in the time of need? And of course, I also come from Southern California. I represent a great area called Orange County, California, which is, if you look historically, really an aerospace industry with wonderful names, of Douglas and of McDonnell Douglas and of Hughes and North American and Rockwell Collins, and I grew up with all of that. All of the fathers of my girlfriends in elementary and junior and high school were engineers working at our great big industrial complex, if you will. So I'm used to seeing that. I also believe that I am the congresswoman with the largest manufacturing base still area left in the United States. If you come to Garden Grove or Anaheim or Santa Ana, what you will see, or Orange, you will see a base that's unbelievable. That is a supplier to NASA, whose little things walk on Mars. If you fly a commercial jet someplace, I almost guarantee you 50% of those parts are probably coming out of my area. So we really care about this industrial base and how we keep it going. Not only are our standards high, but how do we keep our people employed and that knowledge base there as the world is changing? And I've seen it change in a lot of ways. I used to work in transportation, and I recall, and it's even so today, that when we go to put new starts, what we call new starts, a new metro system, for example, that's not built in America. We generally import the people who put that whole thing together. We generally import the craftsmen and the thinkers and the engineers of the transportation projects from a place called England, where they still have that craft. And generally we're importing those parts either from France or from Italy. So we really don't have a domestic market when we take a look at that type of thing. But certainly for defense, we need to ensure that we have it, because the world is a pretty difficult place today. And I think that Congress itself is going through a very basic question, which is the question of what do we need to have and how do we make sure it's there. But before we can answer that question, we really have to answer the question, what is America? You know, what are we going to do? And I think when we looked at the Syria issue that just happened, for example, there were a lot of different reasons why the Congress people, my colleagues, were questioning our ability to go into Syria or whether we should. And then it's the whole question of what is it that we do with our military? And I don't think that has been answered yet. But certainly, many of my colleagues who don't sit on the military committee are now coming to me and saying, you know, this is really an issue that we need to think about. How do we use that all-powerful tool that we have, the greatest educated, greatest, best equipped, best trained military that the world has ever seen? Because it is a resource, but even resources are limited. So I think that the Congress is going to see, I hope you're going to see in the next few months, a reflection of how do we use and what do we need. We tried to do this actually, this sort of while back. We did this under, when Secretary Rumsfeld was in place, he talked about this whole transformation issue that we worked in through the Congress and we were working through a department. And that was the whole issue that we didn't think we were really going to fight land wars in Europe anymore, or where we would have these hundreds of thousands, 12 million people in World War II. We weren't going to do that anymore. We actually didn't even think we'd have Iraq, to tell you the truth. Now, Iraq, you take a look at it, was maybe at any time 90,000 to 150,000 people at a time. So even when you have what I consider a big effort, the efforts are significantly lower than the 12 million men and women we saw in World War II. So even before that, we thought we would not fight Iraq. And so we began the transformation process. What was that? Pulling our troops out of Germany, bringing them back here, building them up here with our families, stationing them here, doing forward bases in Romania and other places, thinking that we'd have this 6-month group that would go. And I still believe, we got sidetracked because we ended up in 2 wars, 2-decade-long wars. But I still believe that transformation that we'll now turn to it, we'll go back to. So the answer is, we're not going to buy everything all the time, everything, etc. In fact, we're going to have to really think strategically about what we need for the future. And part of that is the whole, how do we keep our industrial base up when we're going to order less or maybe not order everything? And I think that's why you're here today, and that's probably why you have this report that's coming in. There are areas, however, where certainly we see the growth, and we should have that. And yeah, as a Californian, I believe this through and through of cybersecurity, for example. We saw just in the last year acknowledged important kind of break-ins, if you will, from a cyber perspective, into our critical infrastructure, private critical infrastructure, utilities, etc. We saw just under 200 attacks, meaningful attacks. That's just going to keep going. So this whole issue of cybersecurity, maybe we've even sat in a room and thought, maybe we didn't invent this whole internet thing the right way. I mean, it was sort of, we stumbled upon it in some ways, and we built up around it. And maybe the answer is that there's a more logical, scientific type of an internet structure that we could have that wouldn't allow it to be so open in some ways, to be so attacked. I mean, we're really looking at things from a different direction, but certainly in the cyber area, I think that's important for our defense, for our strategic interests, and we will continue to spend money. I mean, it's fractured right now because it's such a big animal. Nobody even knows how to really put their arms around it, but we are working on it. I think the second area that's very important is the whole issue of, I think we're going to have less Army people, Marines, etc. But I think that they're going to do a lot more. And I was thinking back the other day when Samsung, I saw Samsung's new thing where, you know, the little CEO guy comes out, he's got the Dick Tracy watch, right? And he's going to do everything to the computer. You're going to be able to watch movies on whatever the guy was selling. And I was thinking back to the Dick Tracy days because, you know, it's almost like if you can imagine it, we finally evolved to it. Okay, it took 70 years, but, you know, we're getting there. My personal favorite for you guys all to invent is, you know, the Star Trek one where I can, you know, the transformer, you know, where you can transport me from here to California and I don't have to take that 10-hour, that 6.5-hour flight and drive out to Dallas and drive from Los Angeles down to Orange County. I could really use that. So if you want to invest in something, do that transformer thing where I get to, you know, beam me down, Scotty, and get there very quickly. These, if you can dream it, if you can think it, I am sure that we can develop it. And so if you look for it, maybe go back to the old cartoons, I don't know, because they seem to be pulling from them. But for the individual soldier or the individual Marine or airman that we have, certainly they're going to do a lot more with the individual. And so I think when we take a look at even women going into combat, for example, you know, they can only be effective if the equipment is designed for their body types. That's an area where I think we're going to need. I mean, you know, I have an armor maker in my area in Orange County, and one of the problems we had was they were supplying and they supply the best. And they were supplying and they were supplying and they were supplying, and all of a sudden a rock ended. Right? And guess what happened? The people got laid off. Because there wasn't that ability to transform and to move. And so we actually, out of the 3 factories we had, 2 of them closed down. Well, now we've got helmets in there, and we've got law enforcement officers and border patrol, where we're working with them to get them the type of armor that we've developed and have been using with our special forces and others, let's say. But this whole idea of how we, you know, how we look to the future and say what we need. Certainly rifles, small arms, firearms, all of these things are going to be in an area. Intelligence, surveillance. We may only have one production plane for the future, the F-35 for a while. But certainly we see that unmanned aerials, things that we can see, things we can send out and not put our warfighters, things you can see over the horizon. All these type of new areas, I think, are certainly areas that we are looking at. And then we will still have the traditional things that we need. We still need to transport our troops. If you don't give me that, you know, Star Trek thing, then I'm going to need vehicles to transport them. I'm going to do logistics. You know, but these very important pieces that we have, we're going to need. So in a time when they're not being blown up every other day, so we don't need to replace them and we don't have that kind of demand, how do we hold on to that industrial base? That is the question we need to ask ourselves. And some have said you do it by diversifying into the commercial extent as much as you can. And, but you know, how do you do that, for example, with ships? It's so very difficult. You know, and it's not just, are we getting to, you know, I've been 17 years in the Congress, I've been seeing the 300-ship Navy forever, but it's never gotten there. In fact, we decommission sometimes faster than what we build. You know, but how do we keep those areas and those workers intact when we're only building a ship a year or 2 ships a year? And how do we make sure that the docks are available, that that retrofitting is going on, especially in a time when we are seeing a crunch on the money? So those are really the issues that we, as a Congress, grapple with, and then, of course, we, as Congress people, as somebody who leads this country and wants to ensure that we do have the best equipped military. How do we do that? We need your help. We need your help because there are real choices that need to be made. Very basic industry that we need to ensure that we have. And then we also need your help in and say, you know, this isn't really that important, or we really don't need to protect that any longer, so that we can protect the correct things. So I'm looking forward to the report, and I'm to reading the report, to discussing it with my colleagues. But I will tell you that it's a real difficult time for Congress people to truly try to set aside, in some instances, their own particular districts and look at the overall base, the industrial base of the United States, especially at the time when we've seen so much of commercial industry leave our country. We need to protect what we really need to keep. So we would ask your help in trying to do that. So let me stop there, and I know that I said that I would try to answer those questions as best I can. I'm looking at a crystal ball just the way you all, in some ways, are also as you look at this industrial base.